Without a shadow of a doubt, this is the best wrestling documentary I've ever seen. What's going on, people? Alex Thorn here, and I'm just a rock and roller who in his downtime likes to watch movies while wearing a bandana. And what's funny is I messed that up because I'm thinking this wasn't a movie, this was a docu-series, but the intro still stands. And one of the craziest things is I have never binge watched anything at all, and this is the first time. And if you want to get my raw, unfiltered post reactions to every single episode, they're available right now for Ultimate Tier members right here on this channel and in this full playlist. Each video is 7 to 10 minutes long of my actual reaction following watching this series. But in a summary, my God, my first thought on this as a package is how crazy people are gonna think pro wrestling is once they watch this. You know, this documentary really takes you there. In the very first episode, it focuses on his upbringing, really the creation of WrestleMania, this family dynamic between Vince McMahon Jr. and Vince McMahon Sr. And you find out that Vince grew up poor, didn't know who his dad was until he was about 12 years old when he met him. Never really got that love or that pat on the back from Vince McMahon Sr. Just they always talked business, and one way or another, Vince McMahon was going to take over. You find out about the deal and how that came about, how his father said, you know what, this is a good idea to sell to my son, because if he misses one payment, I get to keep all the money he gave me and sell to somebody else. So he pretty much put his son on the spot, but also said, this kid will never make it. Well, guess what? He made it. And I love the editing on this because it was so concise. There's this one moment in episode 1 where they're talking about Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan, you know, who he was, Sterling Golden, and in the WWF, the refusal to allow him from Vince Sr. to go to do the Rocky movie. They show that. Vern Gagne's AWA, you see the Hulk Hogan character taking form, taking shape. You see that. Then you see him on WWF TV next to Vince McMahon. There's even behind the scenes footage that I've never seen that I thought was awesome of Vince McMahon directing Hulk Hogan on what to say. They did it perfectly. This is what these wrestling documentaries need to do, because there's so much footage available. And I said this when I reviewed the trailer, which is available now for members as well. There's so much footage to tell the story in pro wrestling. There's just thousands upon thousands of hours of B-roll footage that you can take that'll match. They did it. They did it the right way, and it's so good. And like I said, that's episode 1, the dynamic between Senior and Junior, the creation and bringing up Hulk Hogan. Episode 2 goes into heat. All the scandals, the Ring Boy scandal, the steroid scandal, Hulk Hogan leaving at that same time because of that, the SA allegations, whether or not who they were going to choose next after Hogan. Of course, there was Kevin Nash, there was Lex Luger, and eventually there was Bret Hart. You know, now that I say Bret Hart, I want to say one thing about Bret is I love Bret Hart the performer. I think Bret Hart the man is a very self-absorbed, egotistical, bitter man at the same time. And yes, I understand you may not like that, but man, I don't think Bret could say anything with him without involving himself. Like, they asked him about Vince and he turned it into his relationship with Vince and how Vince lied to him. They asked him about the art of professional wrestling and he was like, the way I do professional wrestling, I was the real artist, I was great. I don't know if there was ever anything he said in this series where he just did not involve himself. That to me was a little annoying, because I'm like, of course, there goes Bret being Bret. With those allegations, they also talk about Pat Patterson, and they don't necessarily speak about him in detail, but you know who they're speaking about when they mention these things. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of stories beyond what you hear in this documentary throughout many, many decades of Pat Patterson taking great advantage of other professional wrestlers. There's a real sad one with the late, great Roddy Piper, and that's all I'll say about that. They slightly touch on in this episode Hulk Hogan leaving to WCW, but the biggest thing for me was them bringing up The Ultimate Warrior and the decline of Hulkamania. But they also spoke about my favorite movie, No Holds Barred, and it means so much to me. The blue, the white, the black, everything I do image-wise for Alex Thorn really comes from No Holds Barred. So I was glad that they talked about that. This episode really leaves off with the steroid trial and the government thinking that they've got Hulk Hogan as their star witness to serve them Vince McMahon on a silver platter. Episode 3 is called Screwed, and it really takes us on that journey from the end of the steroid trial, the new generation, heading into the Attitude Era. And in this episode, I really liked that they showed the vulnerability that Vince McMahon had when Hogan left, that it was a real threat. They vaguely touch on these thin years for the WWF and really how Bret Hart was the next guy. But when we really think about it, Bret Hart was never the guy. They always tried to replace Bret Hart with other people like Kevin Nash, like Shawn Michaels, and Lex Luger. Unfortunately, Bret did not have, which Vince McMahon says in this documentary, he said he does not have charisma, but he has enough to get by. He wasn't looking for somebody who had just enough to get by. Because of them losing so much to the creation of the NWO in the WCW, they had to do something drastic. And that drastic thing was episode 4, Attitude. In this episode, you really explore D-Generation X, Stone Cold Steve Austin, all the lewd and crudeness that was the Attitude Era. There's a moment in this documentary where Vince says like, nobody ever got killed, and they show them depicting death in the WWF at that time. You know, nobody ever pulled out a gun or a knife. They show the Brian Pillman thing. They show the choppy pee-pee thing. Nobody ever got SA'd in this, and they show tons of that. And it's like, Vince, you're so delusional. You were selling toys to 8-year-old kids with this type of content. If you really wanted to push this content, then you should have completely took out toys, in my opinion, even back then, from the toy aisle, because this was not child friendly. This was 14 and up, and even its merchandising should have represented that. For once, Vince McMahon does sell the fact that he felt he was in danger, but when he's asked in this documentary if he regretted not hiring Eric Bischoff when Eric Bischoff came to the WWF to audition in like 1989-90, he goes, no, not at all. And that seems to be Vince McMahon's attitude throughout all of this, is no regrets whatsoever, because after the Attitude Era and the highs and controversies that brought, we go into the family business with episode 5. Episode 5 of this series really focused on Shane, Linda, Stephanie, and Vince. And that's for like the whole first 30 minutes of the episode. Of course, all the crazy stuff that they've had happen. Nobody really asked for that at all. I know that it was interesting for a moment, but it just dragged and dragged and dragged. And it was very interesting that even in this documentary, they said, you know, after Austin left, we didn't know what to do with him. We had to keep on putting him in different positions. So it was these family dynamics with Triple H and The Rock, and sometimes Austin and The Undertaker and the Ministry and all this stuff that they would put him in, that just like, we're trying, you know. But his magic really, really, really did come when he was in the ring with Stone Cold Steve Austin. You do get an insight into how much he loves Stephanie McMahon, and also, of course, he loves Shane, but he's much tougher on Shane. And Tony Atlas is shocked. I haven't mentioned him yet, but he is probably the most shocking person that I saw in this documentary. When he first popped up on the screen in the first episode, I was like, why is he here? Tony Atlas, of all people. And he did great. Then he returns in this episode and has one of the most prophetic things to say about the family, which was, Stephanie, you know not to mess with her. She's just like her dad. I mean, as soon as you meet her and you're in her presence, you know she's not the woman to mess with. Shane is nice. He summed it up just like that. And there's no better way to sum up that dynamic that Vince has and his view on his children than what he just said right there. Of course, they touch upon Trish Stratus's, infamous angle at WrestleMania 17 and the lead up to that with her barking like a dog. And the situation where why would you create all this right in front of your wife, when Linda herself even told Trish, lean over, kiss me on the head in one segment, because that'll really irk people. And Linda says something that's really interesting too in this, which is it's about creating emotion. These are fake scenarios. These are storylines. This family gets it. Wrestling fans don't. They do touch upon CTE and the tragic incident with Chris Benoit. And I just want to add my 2 cents on just one thing here, because I agree with Vince McMahon on the subject of steroids. Steroids doesn't do this to you. What does this to you is the cocktail. The one thing Vince McMahon is not taking responsibility for is the hectic schedule and the constant asking of these circus animals to do circus tricks, because that is a huge reason why these guys end up dying so early and need uppers and downers plus other things. And it's an explosive creation for your heart. The Chris Benoit situation, there's a meme or a short clip going around of Austin saying he's not a CTE guy, he doesn't believe in it, and they're criticizing him. But you got to think about something. Chris Benoit was praised for his hard edge style. Not a lot of people did that style. There's one other person prior to him who did a style like that, who was greatly considered an asshole and bipolar, and that was the Dynamite Kid. Need I say more? I thought by the end of this episode, seeing The Undertaker so loose about Vince McMahon kind of killed a little bit of my respect for him. Obviously, I have all the respect for the man in the ring, but Mark Calloway, I almost want to say definitely knows some stuff. And the stuff I'm talking about is what we get into in episode 6, The Finish. This episode, of course, was going to focus on the recent allegations and the piling of allegations and the absolutely crap storm that was Vince McMahon leaving, coming back, Stephanie resigning, him the sale to TKO, so many of those things. And I think the most interesting part of part 6 of this documentary is the fact that they had Bruce Pritchard come back in January of 2024 to speak on the episodes that they had already been edited 10 months ago. And he saw them and they said, what did you think about it? He goes, I think it's a hit piece. Now, I don't know if they changed anything from January 2024 when he said that to now, like in these previous episodes that he saw, but I didn't think this was a hit piece on McMahon. I think this was a very much expose and allowing Vince to tell his story himself, which, by the way, in the beginning of this whole thing, he says, I'm going to pull back. I'm not going to give you everything, which makes me sad. It really does, because that means that Vince McMahon is going to die with a bunch of question marks around him about what happened. And we're just left to fill in the gaps with things like the Janelle Grants and the Ring Boy and the Screw Job and all these things. He had an opportunity with this to really come out and tell you who he was, and he didn't. As a package, I think that this whole documentary was awesome. It's the first time I've ever binge watched anything. And doing 6 individual reviews for you guys on the membership side really made me clear-headed on how to come with this summary review. And really, when it comes to a bandana rating for this documentary, I'm gonna give it a 4 bandana review because the editing was perfect. The only thing that I don't like about it was just, it was a little too much of the history of WWE and not enough Vince McMahon in depth. But that's also Vince's fault because he didn't want to give it up in this moment where he had the opportunity to give it up for the Netflix cameras. People from one wrestling fan as a youth to you current fans, what did you think of the Netflix documentary on Mr. McMahon? Did you feel it was honest? Did you feel that they painted him in the wrong light? Do you feel that some of the takes on him from the wrestlers were controversial? Let's talk about it all down there in the comments. And if you want to get my longer in-depth thoughts on every episode, you got to join this channel's memberships. That's right, Thorn Theater has real deal membership laminated cards for all of you Thornaholics out there and horror lovers. Not only that, but you get to request your own reviews. Let's say there's something out there you're really dying for me to review, but the masses may not want it, or it's not something that's gonna move the numbers. Guess what? You pay, you control the narrative. You get early access to videos, live only chats, as well as exclusive watch-alongs just for members right here on this channel. And if you don't feel like committing to that, you can always leave me a super chat, super thanks, or buy me a coffee. That's right. Buy me a coffee right now is a way that you can support somebody like me for making videos just for you guys, doing what we love to do. And oftentimes we do it at a loss, but for the passion. But guess what? If you buy me a coffee, at least you're fueling the journey. And right now, Buy Me a Coffee has an update to where when you leave your note of why you have gifted me coffee, I can respond back to you in video form. And with all that being said, guys, I'm Alex Thorn, and you know what I gotta do. I gotta rock out, watch some movies, and review them for you.